Hawaii comes.
Well, thanks for dealing with us. Aloha and welcome to Spotlight Now on Hawaii News Now. Today we're going to be addressing and speaking directly about an issue that continues to plague the state, and we're talking about housing, the lack of affordable housing, and speaking to two leaders that are really helping to lead the charge.
That's right. Sterling Higa is joining us a little bit later in the show. He's come in from Maui. But first, we're going to be talking to the man sitting right next to me here, Hakim Ouansafi, who is the executive director of the Hawaii Public Housing Authority. You've been in that role for quite some time, on your third governor now. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Well, this issue has had so much attention put on it. Of course, the governor signing an executive order, an emergency proclamation to deal directly, saying that housing and the lack thereof is a crisis. Tell us a little bit about the adaptations that have been made now to the proclamation, and if you think this will be enough to satisfy some of those lawsuits and some of those critics.
Great. Well, one thing we agree on is that there's certainly an emergency. We agree that thousands of people are leaving our state because they can't find housing, they can't find affordable housing. And truly, every industry is affected by that. So the second proclamation, basically taking the first proclamation, and the governor listened and we've listened, and this proclamation just removes some of the issues that have become an impediment to housing itself. Such as the 6E, which is the historic preservation. So that's been eliminated from the second proclamation. Also, we emphasizing what the governor has always been saying, this is not about Lahaina. It does not affect Lahaina. So the second emergency proclamation makes it clear that it is not about that. The other thing is the Sunshine Law. It wasn't issues there that people wanted to have it an open meeting, and so this BBB group that's going to be meeting about these things, it's making it clear that's going to go through the process. It's going to be a complete sunshine law. Also removing the 343, that's the environmental impact studies. That waiver is no longer there, so everybody has to go through that process. That was also another issue. And the Land Use Commission, it was a waiver for project 15 acres to 100 acres that's been removed. So we feel that this proclamation is balanced. It addresses all the issues that's been brought to the attention after the first proclamation. And now we're hoping that everybody joins us and start building some housing, much needed housing.
When this revised proclamation has come out, the second one that addressed those issues that you have already spoke of, what was the response like from those who criticized the initial emergency proclamation? Are there still other things within that they would like to see addressed? Because we know that one of the things with this emergency proclamation and the powers of the governor is that this is something that he'll have to do every month and will have to reissue. Do you foresee any other changes that need to happen as we move forward through this process?
I think the subject itself, affordable housing, it's vast. So we are going to be getting additional comments and additional feedback. Something that the governor has promised, that he's going to look at all the feedback. He's a governor for everyone, those we agree with and those who disagree with us. So I think that's going to be going. Another matter that was an issue was one person making all these decisions. The second proclamation has clarified that it's going to be the decision of the 22 member of that group, and the governor has kept everyone that was in that group, and there is now a process that we have to go through to make sure that not one individual is making that decision, but rather multiple folks. One more thing that's different in this proclamation, instead of one person to go to, the governor had tasked 3 agencies, the executive directors of 3 agencies. My agency, the Hawaii Public Housing Authority, it's HHFDC, and OPSD. So all 3 of us as executive directors will be rotating, managing that process, and just in making sure that the intent of the proclamation is moving forward.
So just so that we're all clear on sort of the leadership and how this is going to work, now that Nani Medeiros, she resigned from her position, she was the first ever state housing director, chief of housing under the governor, has decided to step down from that post. The 3 agencies, yours included, did they essentially take over her role?
No, so there are a couple of things. Nani, which really sad that to see her go, because she did such a great job. Her heart was always in it. It continues to be in it. But unfortunately, when things start to affect her family, she had to make some tough decisions. So she had two roles. So she was the chief housing officer. That position is not filled yet. And I think the governor, as he mentioned in one of the interviews, that he may be contemplating having a group of folks to play that role. In addition, for the proclamation itself, for the emergency proclamation, she played the role of facilitator of the proclamation. The three agencies that I've mentioned will be playing that role, but not the chief housing officer.
From a practical level, how do you think that will suffice some of the concerns, as well as just trying to lead this group of people, albeit coming from different backgrounds, trying to maybe not have one specific leader, but really trying to work together as more of a group and a cohort, addressing all these various needs that fall under this umbrella of housing?
Yeah. So the three agencies that the governor selected, they are expert in housing. Our job is to get together, put forth to the bigger group, the 22 folks, any application that comes that want to take advantage of the emergency proclamation and what it offers. Once that's done, it's going to be discussed. It's going to be an open meeting. It's going to be via Zoom or Teams or whatever. Everybody has the right to come in and to provide written testimony, and also summarize the testimony for 2 minutes or provide a new testimony, so long as it's about what's on the agenda. So we can keep the focus on whatever it's in the agenda, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 10 project, whatever's on the agenda. And then we'll go to a vote. Once that vote is completed, let's assume that it wins the support of the majority of the 22. If that is the case, then it's certification, more of, it's not a contract, but it's just a proclamation that will be issued to those to that project, so we can move forward to the next steps.
Tell us a little bit about where you see this going in terms of low-hanging fruit. What kind of projects do you expect to come through the pipeline early to actually make some meaningful change in the immediate future?
So the proclamation speaks and defines, first of all, defines that this is about affordable housing, 140% EMI or less, or any project that will sustain and make sure that that project is built. So from there, once it's done, it's also defined as renovations. It could be a warehouse that can be transformed into housing. Those things can move forward very quickly. What the proclamation does is a couple things as well. For projects that will be owned by the taxpayers, let's say some of our projects that we do, we're state agency, whatever we build and own, the taxpayer owns it, that will be deemed automatically to move forward. It doesn't have to go through the BBB group or anything like that. The Hawaiian homelands, we know that there are constituents that's been waiting for decades. So those projects will move forward so long as the end product will go to those that were waiting in the waitlist. And the reason that those agencies can go forward expeditiously, if you want to say that, is because we have boards. And the boards they have to go through a process. There is a tremendous amount of input from the community as we move forward. And second, because these are taxpayer dollars, and these units that can be built are to the taxpayers. So we'll be looking at construction. Besides the construction, we'll be looking at renovations, vacant units. How can we expeditiously staff up? That's another thing that the emergency proclamation does. It allows us to staff up very quickly and not go through that long 8 months to a year process. All of that is low-hanging fruit that will allow us to execute and provide housing to those in needs.
I want to ask you, you have been working specifically on this issue for some time now. I believe you said this is your fourth governor that you've worked under during this third governor that you've worked under, during this time. With this approach by Governor Green and this emergency proclamation, it caught some people off guard. And as somebody who has gone through this process and have worked with other governors, how surprised were you when he maybe initially floated this idea about this emergency proclamation specifically for housing? And how would you compare that to maybe other governors' administrations that you worked in? What is different this time around?
Well, I was impressed by this governor's ability to take the criticism for the sake of the people. It wasn't about him and criticism that's going to happen. It was about, we have a crisis. It has become an emergency. It has been an emergency for a while. What can we do about it? Obviously, there is the longer fix, go through the legislature and do that, and that's going to come, no doubt. So he took that bold step by having the chief housing officer now at the time and said, take the time and talk to all the stakeholders. And she took about 7 or 8 months, and she came with a product that encompasses every single thing. And then there was the controversies and people are complaining and all of that. And because he's a governor of all people, not just that, he said, okay, let's remove the, now it's becoming an impediment. Let's refocus on what we do best. And so I think just to take that step, it takes really a leader, it takes a lot of boldness. So I love that. And more importantly than all of that, for example, the emergency on homelessness. Because of that, we have dozens of families moving in as we speak to housing. We would not have been able to, we got about 500 to 600 units become available each year, just my agency alone. And to get to that with 93 vacancies out of 350, it's very difficult. So it takes a long time for us to get our staff to be able to get to that unit. What the emergency proclamation does and did, and it's doing for us right now, is we are able to team up with other contractors to go and fix those units so we can low-hanging fruits. Instead of trying to wait 3 to 5 years to build a new unit, you have 300, 400 units that are vacant. How can we as a community, it has to be community effort. So the governor and its proclamations, he just set up that to have the community get together, have the county speak to the state, have this agency speak to the other agency, and have the developer come for one purpose, not to build the governor's mansion. The purpose is very simple. How can we build affordable housing? And I think it's going to take all of us as a village because it's affecting us, all of us. It's affecting healthcare. It's affecting our teachers. It's affecting everyone else. So the difference is something was done about it, and he's pushing it. Even behind the scenes when there are no cameras and all of that, he's always tell us in the cabinet meeting, it has got to be about the people in anything. Let it be housing, let it be healthcare, let it be education. It has always been. And I think because it's derived from that, that's why I love about it, because the end result is affecting nobody and benefiting nobody but those in need. So we are able to really serve our communities.
You know, the governor has set out a goal of 50,000 units over, I think it's the next 5 years. I hope that time frame is right. You correct me if I'm wrong here. How realistic do you think that is, given all the challenges that we've seen?
Well, again, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take the governor, and he's making those steps, and he's putting the platform. But it has got to be with funding. The legislature will play a major role in this, by providing the funding. The developers will play a major role in this. The community will play a major role. I think having those 50,000 units in the next 10 years, it will, all the lines have to, all the stars have to line up, including funding. It's not cheap to build housing, as you know, specifically here. But this proclamation, for example, removes sales tax. That's saving. That's about 5% or so saving. It removes DOE impact fees, and time. Time is a factor. So our agency alone has embarked in 12,000 units to be able to take some of the inventory, deconcentrate poverty along the rail line. So there's another benefit in there. With other developers in the pipeline, I think it's doable. But it will require that we all work together. It will require that we take the leadership that the governor has shown, the legislature that really making affordable housing as a priority, and I think putting it together. Maui is going to have some focus because there's a lot of need, a lot of money there. So we'll just, we're going to push it through, and the legislature and governor will have to make some tough decisions as we move forward.
You know, in your role as the executive director for public housing, if you can speak to that piece specifically when it comes to public housing, because this continues to be something where we know that your department will have to go to the legislature, whether it be for more funding for upgrades to current facilities and housing units, as well as advocating for more. What are some of the highlights, or what are some of the things that you're really pushing for, specifically for your department when it comes to the public housing piece?
Yeah, no, thank you. So we're motivated by the fact whenever we open the wait list, 10,000 folks line up so they can put an application in hopes that they can get one of the 400 units that became available. So that's the need. So we're doing two fronts. For the existing inventory that we have, and we're serving about 45,000 tenants right now. For the inventory that becomes available, we go to the legislature and ask for some money so we can fix those units. We're going to use the emergency proclamation to expedite the delivery. So it'll take us 3 months instead of a year and a half. So that we'll continue to do. We're also going to go to the legislature to fund the Calais Momi, the 10,000 additional units that we're going to build. First phase that we're hoping to bring in front of legislation next session will be 650 units in mayor right homes, as well as 250 units in Kauai and 250 units in Hilo. And we have another site that we're looking at in Maui. So that will be our ask from the legislature for the next session.
I want to ask you about that meeting. The Building Beyond Barriers Working Group had that meeting that was, widely publicized and got very heated. It got very tense, and is in part my understanding of what led to Nani Medeiros deciding that she was not going to stay in her role. Given the tension that we saw there and how difficult that was, how do you expect things to move forward? How do we get past that kind of divisiveness? This is an issue that people have a lot of passion about. Clearly, I see your passion, but how do you bring those opponents onto your side?
I think we're going to kill them with kindness. The bottom line, we understand that the feelings were raw. Maui just happened and there were a lot of issues. I don't think we're going to have a repeat of that. It's unfortunate. It should never have happened. Most testimonies, if not all the testimonies, were about items not on the agenda itself. A lot of comments were about sunshine law. That's not an issue anymore. A lot of comments were about you're going to bypass the environment. That's no longer there. A lot of comments were incorrectly about thinking that it's about Lahaina and all of the things that we see in TikTok and others that unfounded. That has been clarified. A lot of things about LUC, that the big lands and exempting big developers, that's no longer there. We're going to be civil. We're going to remember that we are in Hawaii. We're going to exert the aloha spirit. We're going to remind everyone to keep that. We're going to give everyone the right to speak and really provide comments with love comments. And at the end of that, 22 people in the better group, they're going to make that decision for us to move forward.
I want to also, you spoke about Maui and Lahaina, and even in your beginning opening statement and comment about the proclamation and addressing some of those issues, specifically because that second proclamation came after the fire. When we look at Maui and what's happening there, how do you think that this proclamation and how do you think this group will work specifically for those residents in Maui? I mean, how do you separate the two? Because there are obviously two very big issues independent of each other, but all having to do with housing as a whole.
Yeah, so we are clear and will continue to be clear that nothing that has to do with Lahaina is under this emergency proclamation. That's going to come when people of Lahaina have decided how they want to move forward, and they have done, it's probably a year and a half away from it. There are other parts of Maui that we need to use the proclamation to build units so people can live, and I think that's going to move into that direction. But Lahaina, the BBB group has not been created for that. I think Lahaina is going to have its own everything, and we're not even there to discuss it.
Okay, let's go back to that 10,000 waiting, 10,000 people showing up for 400 units is what I believe you said.
Yes.
Tell us about the need in our community when it comes to, the deeply affordable housing, if you will, and where we're falling short.
The need is tremendous. I mean, it's heartbreaking when we see that. Heartbreaking. The average, I have 45,000 tenants in our agency alone. The average AMI, they make $12,000 per family a year.
Per family.
Per family. This is average per family. An average, meaning there's a lot of people that we have, they have zero income. And people say, lazy people, they can go to work. I'm talking about the elderly. I'm talking about the disabled. I'm talking about a mentally challenged. I'm talking about a lot of folks. These are the people that want housing that are forgotten. So our agency provides that. So we are for 6,250 units, we are blind to income. If your turn comes, you make zero or you make 50% EMI, and those are the levels, we're going to serve you. If you make zero, we're going to subsidize that number. And the federal government, we're about 90-something% federally subsidized in our agency. So the needs are tremendous. It continues to be tremendous. And with the interest rate that's going up, we need all the housing we can get.
In looking at, you mentioned you're going to the legislature asking for 10,000 more units to come online for funding for that. What has the conversation been like with the legislature? I mean, we know at times it's very difficult for departments to go in and get money and, you know, state your case. But what has the response been by lawmakers? Do you feel like you'll have a successful run in the upcoming legislative session with some of these needs that you have?
I believe so. I think my first year I took everything personally. They don't want to give us the money. Second year, same thing maybe. But as I work with these folks, they really have their heart. If they have they have competing priorities, and sometimes they have to make a decision. Do we give money for housing, or do we give it for child support? Do we give money for health care and all of that? Our job is to educate and bring forth what we can build. And I think the taxpayers has put those folks in there, as they have put the governor, to make those decisions, what goes first, what goes next. Whatever they give us, we're going to execute. But we are ready and eager to make sure that this thing gets done. So we'll wait and see. We'll put a very good program there, and they're going to have to look at all the competing priorities. I'm sure Maui will take a big chunk of that. And at the end of the day, we take whatever they give us and move forward and build. If we can build 10,000, let us build 1,200 and come back again next year.
I want to go back to what you were saying about killing them with kindness. You know, there is a lot of litigation around this emergency proclamation. Are you worried that this is just going to get bogged down in the courts and that housing won't actually get built?
Knowing what I know today, I'm very optimistic that we're going to come to an agreement even with those who disagree with us, because truly the big issues have been resolved. Is there another matter there, or two things that we can work together? The idea is, how can we work together not to bug this thing in courts? Because that's not going to help those who are sleeping in the street. It's not going to help those sleeping in the tent. It's not going to help that teacher who wants to come teach our keikis but can't afford to come to Hawaii, so they decide, or like they said in the entertainment, you know, I'm talking about priced out of paradise. We don't want to hear that anymore. And I think even those who disagree with us, they know that. So let's just get together. At the end of the day, let's just work together, because that is the Allah spirit. If we claim to be in this beautiful state, and we are, and to embody that, show us where you really have a big issue, and we'll work together to move forward. The governor has shown that, has certainly took a step. Instead of taking, no, I'm right and everybody's wrong, he said, okay, let's just work together. Let's make these changes. So I'm very optimistic that they're going to see it our collective way this time.
Again, you know, as we sort of wrap up our time with you, I want to just kind of tap into the institutional knowledge that you have and the experience that you've had in this department. For you personally, as you have seen the needs continue to grow over time, I mean, what motivates you to continue and champion this, knowing that this is an uphill battle, that there is a lot that needs to happen? What convinces you and encourages you to stay in this position and continue this fight?
I'll share one quick story. When I took this position, I said to then Governor Abercrombie, I'm going to be there for 1 year. What kept me this and it keeps me here, within the first month or so, my staff came and asked if they can work overtime on this. They want to make this unit become available. Coming from the private, I said, no overtime. Then I changed my mind. I said, okay, fine, get overtime. But I want to make sure you report to me on Monday. That was on Friday. On Monday, they came to me. I said, were you able to move the person? They said, yes, we did move the person in. I said, okay, great. So what happened? He said, I can see the sadness in their face. I said, what happened? He said, well, we didn't sign the paper on Saturday. We went on Monday for him to sign. He passed away. That's what keeps me. Because that person held on to dying dignity. These are real life. So at that moment, I knew that whatever I do, it has an effect. When people are dying on the street, or they hold on to die on the roof, so that's what keeps me on my staff, and that's what keeps the governor and others about affordable housing, because it really affects life. So That's why I've been here now 13 years instead of 1 year.
We appreciate your passion and we appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hakim Ouansafi, for joining us. We're going to be back in just a moment. Sterling Higa is in the building, and we'll see you right after this break.
Hello and welcome back to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. We want to welcome in Sterling Higa, who is the Executive Director of Housing Hawaii's Future. Thanks so much for joining us, Sterling.
Thank you for having me.
As we continue on in this conversation about housing here in Hawaii and affordable housing and just all the issues that are wrapped up into this, we want to specifically talk to you. Well, first of all, you are from the island of Maui, and we want to start there about how you believe what has happened with the wildfires really is impacting this issue. We've already discussed that this has been an issue for some time that many leaders have had to deal with. How on your island of Maui has this compounded it and created an even more of an issue for that community?
Thank you, Ryan. I was born on Oahu, and I live on Maui now with my wife and our 4 children. If you think about the immediate impact, at least 1,800 homes burned down, more than 8,000 people displaced. You're taking a situation where Maui already was an extreme version of our statewide housing crisis and accelerating that with more homes lost. And many of those 1,800 homes, it wasn't one person living in there. It's 11 people in a home. So the need for housing is much greater than ever. And it's really going to make dramatic what's happening in slow motion across the state, which is the pressure of the cost of living and the cost of housing. So our hope at Housing Hawaii's Future is this will be the opportunity we take to resolve this housing crisis first on Maui and then take the lessons learned there so that we can do it statewide.
What do you expect that time frame to look like? I mean, given that there's so much talk about how Lahaina should be rebuilt, there's a lot of tension already coming to the forefront. How do you expect this all to unfold?
Mayor Bisson, in a recent public appearance, said it could be 2 years, potentially more, before Lahaina itself can be rebuilt, and that's because of the cleanup that needs to happen. There's a lot of uncertainty about what can be rebuilt. Can Front Street, for example, be rebuilt because it's so close to the ocean? These issues are going to take time to resolve, but my approach, my personal take is we can't wait to figure out what happens in Lahaina to deal with the housing needs. Those 8,000 people that need housing units can't go back and live in the ash. They need a place to live now. And so we have to look Maui county-wide and statewide and resolve the housing crisis all over the place to accommodate those families, not just in Lahaina, not just in Kula, where families have been immediately displaced.
You know, you have been a vocal advocate for some changes that need to happen within Maui County as well as the other counties when it comes to zoning. What can you tell us specifically about some of the things that you're advocating for in hopes that this will help in this process?
Zoning is the basic policy of land use, right? It determines what can be built and where. And Maui County's zoning is, I mean, I'll be honest, it's a little insane. So Maui County's zoning policy was first adopted in 1960 when Maui became a county. And it hasn't been updated since then. And for perspective, zoning codes are supposed to be updated every 10 years. Now, if you go and read Maui's zoning code, and if you want to fall asleep, I recommend it. Basically, Maui's zoning code is a plan to build a 1950s suburb. And so it's unsurprising. You go to Maui today, and if you drive out of the airport, the first thing you think is, am I in California? And the whole island sort of looks like one big suburb. And that's not an accident. The zoning code literally makes that the only thing you can build on Maui. You can't build dense multifamily housing. You can't build walkable communities. And that's the responsibility of the Maui County Council. It's the responsibility of the Maui mayor to resolve, right? And a zoning code should be updated every 10 years, so we're about 53 years overdue on that. Now, in 2018, Maui County commissioned an audit of the zoning code, which pretty much said, hey, you really got to revise this. It's broken. And in 2020, Maui County started a process to revise Title 19, the zoning ordinance. The problem is, in 2020, we also started the pandemic, so that process is 2 years delayed. And then now we have the fire. So at the earliest, maybe we'll finish that zoning code revision in 2028, 5 years from now, which is a little bit too late for all of the families that need housing now, but also have needed housing for the last few decades. So when I am, and there are a lot of public instances before county councils, before the Building Beyond Barriers group, when I'm passionately arguing for zoning reform, it's because there's this one law, Title 19 on Maui, that literally makes it impossible to build affordable housing. Everybody knows it. Everybody agrees that this is a problem. And there are 9 people on the Maui County Council who could change it tomorrow if they wanted to, and for decades have done nothing. So the question is, if not now, when? Right? And if not those 9 people on the county council, who? And the answer is there is nobody else. It's just those people in the room, and they can actually solve this. We're so used, and I'll stop talking in a second, we're so used to feeling like we're out of control in Hawaii, right? It's foreign investors, it's global capitalism that has, ruined us. But that's not true. There are a lot of things within our control, and they're not sexy. Zoning is not sexy. It's not exciting. You're not going to get to go rah, rah, rah about zoning no matter how hard you try. But that's a law that literally dictates what we can build and where we can build it. And it's broken.
Do you think there's the political will among those 9 to make the kind of changes you think are necessary right now?
God, I hope so. I've spoken to many of the council members. I think that they're intelligent. I think that they understand this is a problem. I think they're willing to make a break from the traditional route of Maui council members on this issue, which has been to do nothing, 53 years of nothing. So I'm hoping that those 9 council members on Maui will take this as an opportunity. And you don't have to revise the whole thing tomorrow, right? But there are little surgical things that they could do that would make it easier to build affordable housing. So from Housing Hawaii's Future, a lot of the research that our organization has been doing are saying, look, here are the little tweaks you could make that would make things better tomorrow. We don't need to wait 5 years for a study to prove that these things will make it better.
We're talking about what's happening just on Maui County, but a lot of the issues that you're experiencing on Maui are statewide. And so the question then becomes, if this is something that needs to be handled on the county level within Maui County, as you speak about, should this be something, a broader conversation that maybe the legislature should address? So if you look at more of a sweeping change, is that another route that could go? And do you think that that might be more realistic to sort of force the hand of these counties?
Well, I think state action is necessary, and there's, broadly speaking, a YIMBY movement, right? A yes in my backyard movement. And most of the time, what that takes the form of is people saying, as long as we build detached single-family home subdivisions, we're going to have unaffordable housing. If I force you to buy a big lot to build a house, that house is going to be less affordable. If I force you to build 2 parking stalls if you want a house, that house is going to be less affordable. If we don't allow duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and I'm not talking about skyscrapers. A lot of people think, oh, density means like a skyscraper. But density are courtyard apartments. They're the walkable cities. If you go to Japan, if you go to Europe, they're the places people love and enjoy, small towns across the world. Right now, the state sometimes has to take that action because at the county level, there's so much pushback. And the pushback, for the most part, is coming from retirement age homeowners. Now, I'm all for retirement age homeowners. I love them, they're great, but maybe a political system that only represents the interests of retirement age homeowners won't make good decisions about land use and about housing. And that's, broadly speaking, the situation. Go to any planning commission meeting, go to most county council meetings, and you won't find a single person under the age of 45, maybe under the age of 50. So half the population is completely not represented in any conversation. And these people at the meetings will talk about, we're doing this for the future of Hawaii. Well, where's the future of Hawaii, right? Why don't we bring high school students to planning commission meetings? Why don't we have college students? Why don't we have young people in the trades who are starting their families and their careers? And the truth is because the system is sort of set up to benefit a very small portion of the population that even though they say it, and they do say it, they say, we love our children, we love our grandchildren, their decisions don't reflect that. And so it's either, my hope, right, is they're mistaken, and once they learn about the error of their ways, they'll change their mind. But the other possibility is they're lying, right? Maybe it's possible that some of the people who claim to care about affordable housing, who claim to care about the next generation, are lying to themselves, lying to their children, and lying to the public, and making decisions that are bad for our children and grandchildren. And we should have that discussion openly and honestly. Unfortunately, young people like myself, right? This is my job at Housing Hawaii's Future. But if you're the average young person, you don't have time to go to the planning commission meeting because you're working 2 jobs, you're commuting 2 hours a day in your car, you barely have time to clean your house, right? Or take your kids to a soccer game. How are you going to make time at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday night to go to a 3-hour meeting in a community center in Kula? You don't have time for that, right? So our whole government system is not representing younger people, it's not representing renters, it's also not representing some of our kupuna on fixed incomes, right? People who are just one bad accident away from poverty. Those voices aren't represented. So our idea at Housing Hawaii's Future is we have to get more young people, right? More renters into these conversations and have their perspectives represented to get change.
You are also on the Building Beyond Barriers working group, just like our last guest. So building off of what Hakim Ouansafi was sharing with us, what do you think of the adaptations that the governor has now made to this emergency proclamation? We know that you're very passionate about affordable housing. Do you think that this will have the intended result and get some of those lawsuits out of the way and actually start to build the housing?
I hope so. I mean, Hakim was just in here, right? One of the primary ways we can help with housing is to encourage the Hawaii Public Housing Authority to move faster, right? So that it can build for the people who are on very low incomes, right? Who rely on federal assistance. That's really important, that safety net for the people at the bottom. And HPHA, Hakim, that whole team provides for that. And a big part of the Building Beyond Barriers group was to accelerate those projects. And there was a lot of distraction, I think, because of environmental concerns, right, and all of these different concerns that are now resolved. So the hope is that group can focus on its work. But the group is not enough, right? the governor can only do so much. I think sometimes we imagine like a government official will be like a superhero. Oh, it's one guy and he'll solve the problem. Governor Green. And that's just not how government works. Clearly, if you count the number of lawsuits against the working group, that's not how government works. There's a lot of uncertainty. No one person can get it done. And that's where we have to think about a broader movement of engagement. You know, shout outs to BJ Penn. He's passionate, he's engaged. It would be awesome if BJ Penn would bring dozens of people out with solutions to problems, right? If BJ Penn would take on broken zoning codes, right? Or if BJ Penn would go and look at the building code and figure out how we can make it easier to build affordable housing, that would be great. But as long as we only show up to yell and say no can, or stop that, or we don't like that, or to say that everything is corrupt and everything is broken, nothing will change, right? Look, there are good reasons to be cynical about government. There are good reasons to feel hopeless, and there is real corruption in government. But there are people in government who want to do the right thing and are working really hard and are getting a lot of, can't swear, but getting a lot of flack for it. And we have to change that to encourage the people we like and who are doing good work, obviously hold people accountable. And then when we approach, right, the testimony box or when we approach writing testimony, we have to look at solutions. Not just, I'm angry about this, but okay, I'm angry about this, I don't want this, but here is what I want, right? Can we just make that shift from I don't want this to, but here is what would be good? And if we all did that and focused on, well, what do we agree on? What can we move forward on? I think we'd make a little bit of progress, right? It's not you swing the bat and you get a home run immediately, but we can hit singles, we can hit doubles, and we can do that all day. We can't just aim for the fences, but we can't stay home either. You have to step up, we have to swing.
I want to ask you specifically about some of the conversations that was happening during that public hearing where we saw a lot of people upset. We saw a lot of emotion in the room that you were a part of as well. And we saw some of the attacks that were happening with Tunani Madaris during that time as well. Your thoughts about how to change that tone, knowing that there are still people and individuals in this community who are passionate about this, and leveraging off to what you just said in the description of, maybe just coming at it, complaining or sharing their concerns, but no solution. How do you think we bridge the gap to be able to have more of that constructive criticism and constructive feedback on an issue where there are so many different opinions of how we get there?
Well, the original social media is this, right? It's a conversation face to face. And a lot of our dialogue about housing now is taking place on the new social media, which is one-liners and zingers and accusing somebody of being corrupt. We have to really get away from that. And we have to realize that if we engage with social media, we're engaging with a false representation of the world, right? I've seen things said about Nani on social media that are just, totally offensive, like completely wrong, totally offensive, and really harmful to any public deliberative process. Because if we just want to do ad hominem attacking the person without ever engaging with the substance of their ideas, we'll never get anywhere. Now, with that said, I don't know that just government meetings are the way that we can resolve this. We have to have a lot more conversations, small conversations like this one, conversations in the community, different structures for community engagement. Because if you go to a county council meeting, right, it's 22-minute testimonies, one after another. You don't get to respond or have a dialogue or change your mind. It's just, here's my opinion, here's what it is, I'm going to go home after this. That's not a way to engage in a democracy, right? You have to have a vigorous debate and an exchange of opinions. It means being willing to admit you're wrong. People look at me like I'm some sort of expert. I'm not an expert on housing. I'm a person who has an opinion. I've talked with a lot of people who I think are intelligent. I've read a lot of stuff about housing. When I'm wrong, I try to figure out why I'm wrong and improve that. And everybody has to do that, right? Like in their little small ways to figure out, okay, well, here's my opinion. I'm willing to articulate my opinion, share it, receive criticism. If the criticism is valid, I'll revise it and change it. But as long as we're just shouting slogans or calling people names, we're never going to improve what we believe, right? The best outcome is two people or more than two people come together, share their ideas, and out of the clash between them emerges something better. And in an ideal government, in an ideal world, that's what's happening. I don't think that's what's happening right now. So we have to figure out what are the structures of community engagement. How can we have more conversations that are longer form, that are in person, where we have that context of dealing with a real person rather than just, thumbing our keyboards and calling each other names.
I want to ask you, similar to what we just talked about with Hakim Ouansafi, which is this idea of low-hanging fruit. Where do you see the low-hanging fruit in this? Because we know that housing is tough. We've been facing it for several generations now in Hawaii. Where do you see the ability for change? Is it that county council that you're talking about, or is there something else?
Yeah, let me just tag 3 policy changes I think are important. So one is single-family zoning. The idea that you can have one detached single-family home on a lot is designed to make housing unaffordable, by definition, right? A 1,200, 1,500, 2,000 square foot home on a 6,000 square foot lot is not going to be affordable for the majority of the population. So if that's the only thing we build, we will never have affordable housing. We have to think about density. Can we have 2 units, 3 units, 4 units on each of those lots? I'm not talking about a skyscraper. That's one. Moderate density, sometimes they call it light touch density. A second idea is the minimum lot size. So should you have to buy 6,000 square feet to own a home? Because that's what minimum lot sizes are. Or can we have smaller lots with smaller homes for retired kupuna, people living alone, young people starting their families, to be able to move from being renters to homeowners without having to make that jump into the $800,000, $900,000 home. And a last thing is minimum parking requirements. Across the state, and some counties worse than others, Maui County may be worst of all, we require people to build at least 1, sometimes 2 parking stalls if they want to have a home. And that's even if their home is in the middle of like a town, right? Even if their home is near transit lines, they still have to build these parking requirements. Now, what we know from studies, and we have some research coming out on this, is these minimum parking requirements add between 12 to 25% to the cost of development, which, if we think about the most affordable housing, means we're pricing people out of housing at the bottom. These are just 3 changes, right? But the truth is there's singles like this all over the place. And I'm not saying, it's only Sterling's ideas, it's only my way, right? There are all sorts of different ideas that we can each contribute, but what we should focus on is, okay, what are the simple things we could do today that would move us closer to affordable housing, rather than thinking we're going to get some grand solution that fixes everything all at once. And if we hit single, right, we can score. And it doesn't take that long. I think, I see Kauai Council moving on some of these ideas. I see Maui County Council considering some of them. I think at the state level, there's tremendous initiative to get some of this done. By this time next year, we could be, celebrating some actual changes that makes things better. But it's going to require a lot of people getting active, staying disciplined, and showing up sometimes to the boring council meetings and making themselves heard.
One of the things with this proclamation by the governor was that sense of urgency. We heard from Hakim, who said it is a crisis. From your standpoint, do you agree? Do you believe that that sort of action needed to be taken to declare this an emergency? And in your mind, what is the biggest threat or the crisis that we are facing when it comes specifically to housing?
So many.
Where do I start? I want to back up one step, which is underneath the housing discussion is a more fundamental question, and it's, are we growing or shrinking as a state? And for the last 7 years, we've been shrinking as a state. Between 10 and 15,000 people net loss every year. That's about 100,000 people that have left. And I think once we hit next year, for sure, total 100,000 people over 8 years. We're not having an honest discussion about what that means, to lose that many people that quickly. That's like 1% population decline every year. You keep that up for a while and everything falls apart. Why does it fall apart? Well, one, you don't have nurses anymore to care for sick people. We already are experiencing that in all 4 counties. We don't have teachers to teach our children. We're already experiencing that in all 4 counties. Try to find a plumber, try to find a carpenter, try to find someone in the trades. We can't find people to fill those jobs. We can't find people to find service jobs. So employers are struggling. at the same time, your tax revenue goes down. So we've been used in Hawaii since statehood to constant population growth. And in that time, we didn't build enough housing to accommodate the population growth. Housing prices skyrocketed, and now we're on the downslope of that. And if we don't get a handle on the housing situation, that exodus is going to continue. Because look at housing prices. We lost 100,000 people in the last 7 years. Did housing prices go down? No. And it's because we haven't been building the kind of housing that's truly affordable for our kupuna on fixed incomes, for young families just starting out. And until we get a handle on that, our new population dynamics, until we figure out how to at least stabilize the population loss, we're going to be facing something much scarier than people's fear was before. The fear people had before was, oh, growth is so bad, growth is going to destroy Hawaii. If you thought growth was bad, just wait till you see the opposite. That's where we are now. That's where we're heading. And if we're not honest about that, we're going to make bad decisions. And I haven't seen people really grapple with that. There's fringe people who want to talk about it, but we should have a mainstream conversation. We should have hours of conversation about this. Is Hawaii growing or shrinking? And what do we want? And the people who want Hawaii to shrink should have to defend their position, because that's been a popular position for a long time. Oh, we can't handle growth. But let's draw the lines, connect the dots between what happens when the population shrinks and all of the bad things that we're encountering today. And I'd be willing to bet a lot of them are linked to that decline. So let's have that discussion. Where do we want the future of Hawaii to be? Growing or shrinking? And then let's think about our housing with that in mind. But we can't really talk about housing until we talk about growth or shrinking.
We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you about engaging. You know, you mentioned getting to come to some of those meetings 3 hours on a Wednesday. As you said, most people in Hawaii, unfortunately, they work at least one, if not two jobs, and they just don't have that kind of time. How can people, do you think, best engage? Especially, I found it so telling when you talked about, feeling like this is happening to us, right? That they're outside buyers. Oh, there's people from the mainland, or maybe they're coming from Japan or from Asia and they're buying all cash. There's all this sort of, I don't know if it's urban legend. I don't know. There's, I'm sure, some truth to some of that. But how do we engage and get past that so we do feel empowered while still knowing that we face all the challenges of balancing life?
For Housing Hawaii's Future, we have a pledge called the Stay Movement Pledge at staymovement.org, or you can find it on our Instagram at Hawaii's Future. We provide people with simple ways that they can get engaged. We provide them with actionable information about the housing crisis. Our focus is all the stuff we can't control. That's not, why are we talking about that? Let's figure out what are the things within our power, within our grasp, that we can actually improve, and let's do those now. And we try to break down the issue, provide people the information they need, and also the skills they need of knowing how to engage, where to engage, how to be civically effective. Because our schoolhouse rock theory of government that we learn in high schools doesn't actually prepare you for participating in government. We try to bridge that gap for the people of Hawaii.
Okay, and remind us again the website.
Staymovement.org. It's also on our Instagram at Hawaii's Future.
Okay, Sterling Higa joining us from Maui today, Executive Director of Housing Hawaii's Future. Thank you so much for making the trip and having this conversation with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. We'll be right back.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great conversation today with two guests talking about the issue of housing. We covered a lot of ground and heard some updates specifically about, of course, the governor's proclamation, the second proclamation that came out regarding housing, some of the amendments that were made, and both of our guests' comments on how they believe that some of those issues and criticisms were addressed in this second proclamation.
Yeah, you really hear a lot of passion from both Hakim Ouansafi and from Sterling Higa. They are both, of course, part of the Building Beyond Barriers group. that group. There was a lot of tension the last time they met. We'll see what happens in the next iteration. But it does sound like they both feel that the governor has addressed, especially our first guest, saying that the governor has addressed the issues, some of the environmental concerns, the Sunshine Law concerns, the historic preservation issues. So hopefully, with that out of the way, they are both saying that maybe there can be some forward momentum. And you really heard Sterling lay out the consequences if things don't change.
Yeah, he really painted that picture of what happened with this housing crisis that continues to not only put people in jeopardy of not having homes, but forcing them to leave the state. And we've talked about the brain drain. We've heard this phrase being coined over time, and really him painting a picture of what it looks like when some of those people leave. We also heard from him of just some of the laws that he's advocating for to be changed regarding zoning on the island of Maui, and how he believes that some of those fundamental changes will actually pay a dividend and really make a difference, especially on the in Maui County.
Right, and of course these issues are intertwined. Maui is really its own conversation in the moment because of everything that's happened in Lahaina. We have hundreds and hundreds of homes, 8,000 people displaced by what has happened, and where do those people go? He did say, Mayor Bisson says it's going to be about 2 years at a minimum to rebuild that area. What happens to all those folks in the meantime? That is something that we're going to be talking with our guest next week, and that is Governor Green.
That's right. We are going to be bringing the governor back here. Of course, there are a lot of issues to discuss, including getting updates on what's happening on the island of Maui, with residents who lived in the area of Lahaina were allowed back in. The state will be opening up to West Maui, as Ka'anapali and those other resorts will be opened beginning next month as well. We're going to hear from the governor his thoughts and the feedback that he's been getting from the community, as well as addressing other issues that continue to plague the state. A lot of focus has been on Maui, but there still are other issues that are out there that the governor is dealing with.
That's right. Red Hill, of course, the unpacking is about to start. October 16th, I believe, is the date that the Navy has said that they will start that defueling process. We'll get an update from him on what those conversations have been like, any concerns that he might have. Of course, they've been testing those lines, but how secure really are they? We know that this is such an important issue for the state, so we'll be talking about all of that with the governor and hopefully with you. Please do. We read all of your comments on Facebook. We appreciate all the engagement. We want to see more of it, and we'd love to have your questions for the governor next week. Until then, thank you so much for joining us.
We're going to leave you with a look of Hilo this afternoon. A beautiful shot there of Coconut Island out there on the island of Hawaii. We'll see you right back here for Spotlight Now with Governor Josh Green next Tuesday.